Today, we are talking about workflows and systems and checklists and all of the good things that you need to keep yourself sane as a Webflow designer and really succeed, because with every client website project, there is so much to manage and handle. And as a business of one, it's just hard to do it all on your own. So take it from me, accept the help, and let's go get organized together. I recently released my Webflow workflow checklist for designers, which is totally free, by the way, and you can grab it in the link down below. And it takes you through my exact step-by-step process that I do with every single client project and every Webflow website. And it's broken down into 4 parts. We've got your design setup, we've got your Webflow setup, your Webflow development and build, and then finally the final prep and client handoff, which is often the piece that people don't really talk about. And we're gonna get into some of those nitty-gritty details and the tools that I use that help speed up my process, keep me organized, and make me feel 10 times more confident as a solo designer without the burnout. So let's get into it. Okay, first, quick little intro. I am Maddie, and I'm a brand and web designer, and I work with online creators and entrepreneurs to build custom websites that give you more freedom and flexibility. And yes, one of my favorite tools to do that with is Webflow. Now, I've been working with clients on Webflow websites for just under 5 years. And within that time, my process has changed a lot. Mainly because when I first started, I didn't have one. And in the really early days, I'm gonna out myself a little bit here, I was skipping a lot of steps. I would send off a website to a client to review, and oftentimes they were the ones that had to catch some of my tiny little mistakes. They might find missing links or some responsiveness issues, or, a photo wasn't stretching properly when changing screen sizes or things like that. And as a newbie Webflow designer, that's just a bit inevitable if you don't have a system in place, because there is so much more to take care of and handle on your own. So I started using a system, a checklist, and combining all of the steps that I would take within each project to help me essentially check my own work. Okay, so first thing you are gonna do is open up the link for the Webflow workflow checklist. You'll find that in the description of this video. And up in the top navigation, this will look a little different than my screen where it says share, but for you it's gonna say duplicate. Click that button and it will essentially duplicate a version of this page into your own Notion account so that you can edit it to kind of fit your own workflow as you need and check things off and copy and paste it as many times as you want. And to start, we're going to talk about step 1 and 2, which is going to be design setup and your Webflow setup. And I'm going to actually talk about these two things together because for the way that I start my projects, they are actually very connected. And to explain that, I first need to give some context that one of my favorite tools that I use in literally every single project is the Relume Library. The Relume Library is a massive selection of unstyled components for your Webflow website that you can copy and paste directly in. So let's take a look at some of what they have to offer. So here's some hero header sections. These are pretty standard layouts. Looking at them at first might not seem like much, but you can copy and paste these directly into your Webflow site. And they already use the client first class naming system, which is my preferred method of class naming. So when you go this route, all the work is already done for you, and then you just need to customize it and refine it and add your branding, and just the bones of it are already set. And on top of this, while this is great for the Webflow build, the reason why this is also so connected to the design phase is because they also have a Figma kit, which includes every component that they've built for Webflow inside of essentially their own Relume library kit, so that you can also copy and paste these designs into your Figma designs when you are in the wireframing phase before you actually get into building, which is huge. So that's where we are going to start. Let's start with this Figma kit. You can access that Figma kit by clicking this little link that I've included in the checklist. This is the free version that you can use, which has a lot of great components to start if you just want to test out if you like this. I have upgraded to the paid monthly subscription. It is my favorite monthly subscription that I have. They can take all my money for as long as they want. It is so worth it to me. So that's my little spiel about Relume. Now, when you open up the Figma kit, it's going to look a little something like this. You're going to be greeted with a nice little documentation page. It's going to give you some instructions that I highly recommend you go through. We're going to breeze through some of this now since this is kind of a high-level overview, and pop into the style guide, which is the most important piece here. because it's already put together everything that you need within your Webflow site, from all of your headings and your sizes down to all of your different text sizes, from your extra bold to your tiny. We've got color blocks. We can add our own branding within here and all of this good stuff. And why this is important is because not only does it directly match up to the template we're going to be using in Webflow later on, it gives us the speediest way to update this with our branding and then have this update all of these components for us. So using the Batch Styler plugin, which is linked in their kit, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So let's go ahead and click on that, and let's just update this heading H1 to something totally different and unique that we'll be able to spot. Okay, I guess I didn't pick something that different, but let's go light italic. It's a mono font, and let's make it like 88. Okay, and I'm going to click update. And we'll see it immediately reflected on our style guide. Click out here. So we see that our heading 1 is updated. Now I'm going to scroll down within the components that they have included. I'm going to go to hero headers. It's most likely where we're, and look, all of the H1s are already updated with my branding across the board. So now it is so simple for me to just copy and paste these different components into my wireframe designs. And it will be 10 times faster because my branding's already taken care of. So let's go back to that style guide, and I'm going to show you how I use this. Once you get this kit, you want to immediately duplicate it every time you have a new project and tweak it. So I have actually used these Relume kits as my base, but then I have tweaked them into my own template. So this is one of my agency foundation templates. And I've already created my own wireframes with my own sections that I like to reuse, but it is built off the backbone of their components. So I still have all of their components accessible, even if I am working essentially from some of my own wireframe designs. And then I've created sort of a simplified style guide, which is really the headings and the paragraph styles that I like to use. I've added a few extra classes and things like that that are important to me. And so that way, when it's time to update the branding, which we will do in this first phase, we just update it here across the style guide, we update our color styles, and everything becomes faster. Here is a version where I've taken that template and actually included the branding elements, changed some fonts, added some colors, and you can see how that looks when it's all finished. And so every time I want to work from, let's say, this template, I'm going to be duplicating this Agency 1 foundation or directly the Relume Library Figma kit. So you're going to use some sort of starter template. You can create your own if you want to keep it really simple. You don't have to use Relume, of course. You just want to make sure that you're adding all of your heading styles, your paragraph styles, your color styles within some sort of template of your own that you can then duplicate and reuse with every project. We'll then update that style guide with the client's branding for whatever project it is that we're working on. We can add logo assets, design assets, and then get to the fun part, which is actually building all those pages. And then you'll want to share those designs with your client, get your feedback and approval, make your revisions. And then this is the part where we want to now export all of these assets. And within Figma, the way that we'll want to do that is down here using the export tool. I like to export everything at 2x. Because that way when I'm uploading it into my website, I know that it's going to be really high quality, especially if I'm having these full screen images like this. You'll also want to export any logos. Make sure you export that as an SVG, which I've got right here, which will keep it more scalable for any vector graphics, and PNGs for anything that, doesn't have a background. You'll just go through your project and export all those assets. And once you've done that, we now want to start talking about file size. And more often than not, these file sizes are going to be a bit bigger than we want. So I use tools like iLoveIMG and tinyjpeg.com to compress those images to make sure that everything is at minimum less than 500 kilobytes, as I've listed here, although that's honestly being very generous. I would say 500 kilobytes is good when we're talking about large full screen hero images. If you can get it less than that, cool. But when talking about logos or smaller images, you want them even smaller, and chances are they will be. I actually prefer I Love IMG because in addition to compressing all of the image, it also gives you options to resize them. So if you're getting photographs from a client that maybe a photographer took and they're huge, they're all like 6,000 pixels wide, that's way larger than you want it for your website, this is a fast way to first resize it and then immediately compress it, and just, again, speed up the process. That's what we're all about. So that's going to be your design setup. Get organized, export your assets, get your designs in a great Figma starter kit before we move into phase 2. Phase 2 Webflow setup. So step 1 is going to be deciding on the class naming system that you're going to use. If you are creating your own templates, if you're not using Relume, then there's a couple other class naming systems that you might prefer or decide to use. That's totally fine. As I've mentioned, I love to use FinSuite's Client First, so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And you're gonna want to duplicate the Relume clonable if that's the method that you are using. So click on this link, and it's gonna take you here to clone their pre-made style guide with all of your classes for your headings, your paragraphs, your button styles, padding, spacing, everything already set up for you. Big game changer. So I'm just gonna show you in Webflow. When you head over to the Pages panel and the Style Guide, you'll see all of the different classes that they have already updated and created for you. And you can see in your Style Manager, everything is here. We've got max widths, we've got different margin classes, padding classes, all the good stuff to just speed up the process. Honestly, we're gonna have to create a game about how many times I say the phrase speed up the process. All right, moving on to the fun stuff. So now let's start setting up that style guide with their brand fonts. I'm going to be using my Agency 1 Webflow template, which corresponds to the Figma template we were just looking at. And I have built this, again, off of the Relume clonable. So I cloned Relume's style guide, and then I built my own designs on top of that so that they have all of the same Relume classes right out of the box. And I do this for every template I create, every client project, everything. So I'm going to go straight to the settings before we even get into designing, because we're going to update some fonts. And we'll go to the Fonts tab. Okay, so I've uploaded all of my custom fonts that I'm using with this brand, 90s Headliner, Montserrat, and I've also included my Adobe Fonts API so that I can connect to an Adobe font I'm using as well. And then Google Fonts can be found up here if you're using any of those. Then make sure you save all those changes, head to General, and scroll down. We're going to quickly turn off what's called the Display Made in Webflow badge. I've already turned this off on my template, but go ahead and click this little button, which will keep a Webflow logo from displaying when you publish your test site. And then save all of your changes, and let's pop into the designer. Navigate to your style guide page. So again, I already have a lot of my pages set up. When we head over to the style guide, you'll see this is Relume's library style guide. So this will look the same as yours if you are using their clonable. And we want to update this entire page now with our new fonts. So in the checklist, you'll see I have something listed as update global colors and any global classes, i.e. all H1 headings. So yes, I do mean your heading style extra large, H1, H2, H3, etc. But first, we're going to start with these pink ones. Always start with the pink ones before the blue. Click on heading 1, and then under the style selector, we're going to click the HTML tag that says all H1 headings. And this will help you out when you are adding any new typography to your page, when you are working with rich text. You just got to start with this foundation first. So let's make this our font. We know we're using 90s Headliner, normal, and all caps is already on, great. And then for heading 2, we're going to do the same thing, all H2 headings. And this one we're using Ivy Presto, normal, and we are not using all caps. And I'm going to go through and update the rest of these. So now that we've gone through and updated these HTML heading tags the way that we want, the next step would be to go and update these blue tags, which are the rest of our heading classes. So heading style H1, heading style H2, basically meaning that even if you give something an HTML tag of H1, you could still style it as an H3 or an H4. The reason why this is important is for SEO purposes, so that when Google crawls your site, you can still have proper heading structure of H1, H2, H3, etc., without necessarily needing to style them that way. This was something that was super confusing to me when I first started Webflow, and I just always messed up my style guides because I didn't do them properly this way. So remember, always starting with our HTML heading tags, making sure we click that all H1 headings and doing it all the way down through heading 6, and then getting into the rest of the classes and the heading styles. I'm going to skip through this. I don't need to style the rest of these at the moment. And you'll go through and do the same then for some of these other HTML tags. So same thing. If you see that pink, that's click on the item and go over here and click all paragraphs. And then you can move on to colors, adding in your color palette here, adding in background colors, and all of this will come into play later. So just that is a quick little overview, a bit high level about how you will update your style guide with your branding. So now that that's done, let's see, we've done all of this, we've done our classes. Then the last step will be to upload your images and your icon assets, which you've exported into small file sizes into your Webflow account, which you will do right here in the assets panel and by just clicking upload. Depending on how you like to do it, you can either upload them all at once just to save some time, or you can kind of upload them as you go and build out the pages. I switch back and forth between the two methods depending on what I'm feeling, but just always making sure that they are small file sizes. Okay, so now we are getting into phase 3, which is going to be the actual Webflow build. Now, I'm going to be showing you an example of a template that I've already built, but we're going to kind of go through some of these checklist items and explain them a bit more in depth. So something I like to do, you can close these toggles, is I will duplicate these toggles for each page of my site, always starting with the home page. And the reason that I do that is because oftentimes a lot of these items will help me speed up my work if I take care of them from the start. So let's say I build my homepage and maybe my headings were out of order, or I didn't add alt text, or certain animations weren't quite right, responsiveness issues, whatever that was. If I go to duplicate that page, deleting the sections I'm not using and keeping the sections that I am, that mistake will be present on all pages that I duplicate from. So that's why I like to go through and kind of check my work with a fine-tooth comb as I go, because it's just saving me some potential headaches in the future. So let's go through that homepage together. Obviously, first thing is you're just gonna want to build and style your page. I like to use Relume components to do that, and then I'll go in and fine tune everything, as well as creating components for any repeatable sections. The most common is gonna be your navigation and your footer. So let's hop into that and go to the homepage. The components that we're reusing on this page are gonna be the navigation. Anywhere you hover that is green, so I've also used that here for my project slider because I know I'm going to want to use that on other pages as well. I have a logo client list, and then I have a CTA section right here that I know I'm going to duplicate a lot, and then lastly I've got a little effect here on my footer. So in the components panel we can see everything that we're reusing. So this way when I go to create my, let's say, project page, it's going to have like 3 out of 4 of these components. I might as well just duplicate the home page and then delete the sections I don't want and continue building from there. That way all the components are already in place. Okay, so next up would be to check our H1 through H6 headings, make sure that they are in order. And that is going to look like every time you add a heading, when you click this little element settings icon, you can choose what heading HTML tag it gets. So your first one is always going to be your H1 tag, and then the next heading you use you're going to want to be an H2. So you can see as I hover over my next heading, I've used the H2 tag. And now as long as everything is H2 or below, you're good to go. It doesn't always need to follow a perfect order. So this is a heading 2 as well. This might be when I click into featured projects. This is also an H2, but you can see I've styled it as a heading style H1 because I wanted it to look a little bit different. So just going through every heading on your page and making sure it follows the proper order. You get the idea, but as long as it's always H1 on top and everything else H2 or less, you're good to go. So we can check that one off the list. Now, adding alt text to photos and icons or labeling as decorative. This is going to be for accessibility purposes when you launch your site, making sure that all of your photos have proper alt tags. Rather than doing this individually throughout the site, the fastest way to do this is actually just going to be to go to your assets panel and to expand this. And to do it right here in this panel by clicking, let's say, this gear icon. And you can, if something is decorative and it doesn't need an alt tag, you can click that button right here, or you can type a description. If you do it this way, if you reuse this asset on other pages, it will update across the board. So whether or not you want to do this per page or at the end of the project is kind of entirely up to you, but that's where you're going to handle your alt tags. And moving on down, then you would add element animations and interactions, add page interactions, add preloaders, all that stuff. This is all optional depending on how advanced your site is, but I like to do that at the end of a build. And typically, if I am adding any sort of fade-in animations or slide-in animations, I like to make them their own class. So that way I can build everything static and then come in at the end and, let's say, wrap it inside of a div and give it a class. So for example, you'll see that these two items just faded in. It's because they are wrapped, if I click on it, inside of a div that's called load 1. And then this is going to be wrapped inside of a div called load 2. That's how I get that kind of staggered effect in the preview. Now, if I were to take this class off, that would remove the animation. So you can add this to any element across your site, and it just keeps it smooth and easy way to add some kind of simple, elegant animations. After that, let's see, let's add some SEO in the page settings. If you don't have your client's copy and you're not exactly sure what sort of SEO tags they may want to use or keywords they may want to use, feel free to hold off on this step until later. But if you do want to do it now, the place to do that would be in the page settings. You'll click this gear icon per page, and you can update real quickly those title tags, those meta descriptions, all right here. So it will even show you a little preview of what it will look like for Google. Okay, check nav, footer, header, and section tags and element settings. Let me explain what the heck that means. So when you are creating elements, if you are using Webflow's native elements, like if you use their section, if you use their container block, all these sort of pre-built ones will already be tagged appropriately, so you won't have to worry about that. But if you're like me, and maybe you don't like some of their pre-made elements, I often will just set a div and turn it into a section. And what that means is just that you're going to have to do one extra step and give it that tag. So I'm just going to add a div to this page. Okay, and let's say I want this to be a new section. So I'm going to call it section underscore new. Okay, and then within my section, go to the element settings and make sure that the tag, you change it from div to section. And so that's what I mean by element tags, is if you are not using the Webflow native components, which for some other reasons I don't always love to use them because it's got some default settings on it that just aren't my favorite, I will just use divs for just about everything and then tag them appropriately. So whether that is a section, a navigation, a footer, a header, etc. I think you get the idea. So that's what that little check item is all about. Of course, these ones are pretty self-explanatory. Go through the page, test all of your links, make sure they go somewhere, and make sure they go to the right place. Also test your button hover states and make sure everything is working properly if you have them. You're going to want to test your submission forms if you have any, make sure it goes through, check what email it's going to. Don't forget to switch it from your email to your clients if you're testing it out for yourself first. You want to then also rename and organize any class names if needed. So this will really come handy if you are using other third-party apps or softwares to copy and paste some components. So specifically, if you're using Relume, if you're maybe using something like Flowbase or anything of that nature, and you want to change the names of the classes to better reflect something that your client will understand, that's what this step is all about. So often if you're copy and pasting components from Relume, it'll be called something like layout 141, and that's just not descriptive enough when we give it to a client. We want them to be able to find what they're looking for a bit quicker. So we'll go through and we'll rename those classes. The fastest way to do that would be to use FinSuite's Chrome app. I don't know what we're calling these. Are we calling these plugins, apps? They have an extension for Webflow that you can download from their site. And if you go into their little candies folder, nope, just kidding. If you go into their client first folder, they then have something called folders. And this is a way to really quickly rename all of the classes. So within a section, let's say it's called, let's find a good one. That would be a good layout 402, right? We don't want that. So we're going to click this little edit icon. And let's say we call this, I don't actually know what this item is going to be, so I'm just going to wing it here. I would maybe want this section name to be like client logos. And now anytime something says layout 402 within that section, it's going to automatically update to client logos. So you don't have to redo like 20 classes, you just have to do it once. So again, keeping it very high level for this video here. And then don't forget to click Save Changes, and that will update it across your site. I'm gonna click Close because I don't know what I just changed, so I don't actually want to make that change, but that's what I mean when I'm talking about renaming and organizing class names. That's an advanced step to do for your clients, especially if they're not going to be editing their site a ton, then this is less important and kind of up to you if you want to do it. And then last but not least, you're just going to want to check your desktop, your tablet, your mobile landscape, your mobile for responsiveness, and make sure everything is sizing appropriately, make any changes as needed. And don't forget to always then publish it to your test site and make sure that it still looks the same. Sometimes within Webflow, if you're checking for responsiveness and you just use this little preview tab, things don't always display perfectly, especially if you're embedding any sort of additional code. You always want to go to this little publish tab, publish to your staging site, and then click this link to see what it looks like live, and just make sure everything is adding up. And then you will repeat that process for every page on your site. And again, this is like a really thorough one, so please tweak this as needed for your own sanity, but this should include just about everything. Last but certainly not least is going to be phase 4, which is your final prep and client handoff. This is a lot of those very nitty-gritty details, more technical side of things that can be really important at the end of a project. So starting off with some of these first check marks, we've got designing your 404 page, which you will find over here under utility pages. You've got your password protected page, your 404 page. Just don't forget to go ahead and style these two to match your brand, because if a link is missing or there's a redirect that doesn't go properly, they're gonna land on this. So those are important too. Then next we want to double check that our style guide page is a save as draft. If you're using the Relume clonable, it's already done for you, but if you are using some other form of template or just starting from scratch, that is going to be an important step so that people aren't landing on your style guide as an actual page in your site, that Google isn't crawling it. And that's what this little orange pencil icon means, and it says draft right here. And you'll do that, let's go to a regular page. Maybe this starter page is a good example, and click your page settings, and then under save, just go save as draft. And that's how you do that. And delete any unused pages you don't need or that your client doesn't need, and any other pages that shouldn't be public, you can save them as draft as well. Then we want to add our open graph image in the home page settings. An open graph image, if you are not familiar, is basically going to be, we're going to click on page settings again. It's going to be how it looks when someone shares a link to your website. So like, let's say you're in a Facebook group and you go to share a website, and then it automatically pops up with this great picture and description, and you didn't have to do anything. That is your open graph preview. So these are really important, especially if you're like texting links to people. This is what's going to pop up. So it's going to pull your title tag and your meta description down here in your SEO. You can have it the same as your title tag, or you can change it for your open graph if you want. And in order to get that image, it's a little bit of a tricky process. So here's what you're going to do. I'm going to open up Figma right here because I already created this. And so the dimensions are 1200 wide by 650 pixels tall. And I often just take a screenshot of the home page and throw it in here, but this can be anything you want. This could be a photo, whatever you want it to be. Export that as a JPEG. Go back to Webflow, upload it to your assets, which you can see I've already done here by clicking that upload button. And then you're going to click the gear icon once you've uploaded that image and click this little share open button. You wouldn't know to do this. It's kind of confusing. And you get a link. You're going to copy this link. You're going to go back to Webflow. You're going to go back to the page that you're adding this to. Scroll on down and then copy and paste that URL right here in the Open Graph Image URL. And that's how you do that. You can use the same one for every page if you want. You can make it different. That's totally up to you. I typically use the same image. Okay, so we've done that. Now adding meta titles and meta descriptions in that same settings panel. That's where you're going to put all your SEO rich keywords. And then if your site has CMS collections, we want to make sure we're also adding descriptive fields so that our client understands what the content is and where it's going. So what that means is that when you open up, let's say in our CMS panel here, we've got like projects or works. I'm going to click the gear icon for the full CMS. And let's say, under category, we want to give them a little bit of extra information under help text about what exactly this means. What are they inputting here? This is also a great place to put maybe file size or dimensions of a photo, like any help text that might be important for a client to then better use their CMS. Don't forget to add that here, because sometimes when we're building it, it can get a little complicated. So you just want to be crystal clear on how to use each of these fields. And that's what that step is all about. Then we want to remove any unused classes. Again, this is a nice to have, not a need to have, but it might help with site speed and things like that. Or if you copy and paste something into your site, and then you don't end up using those classes, it will just help clean everything up. So if your client ever has to come in here, it's just nice and pretty. So you'll do that all the way down. Nope, you will not. You'll do it right here by clicking cleanup. Now I've already done that to this site, but it will show you all the classes that you can clean up, and then you just click remove. Deleting unused assets from your asset library. I like to do this as well so that a client maybe doesn't see any placeholder images I added in or anything that really isn't for them, as well as just organizing the asset library all together so that they can find what they're looking for. And that's just going to be as simple as going to your asset library, selecting the things you want to delete. You can create folders and maybe put like all logos in a folder, all images in a folder, all icons. Again, totally bonus extra step. If you want the brownie points, that's something you can do as well. Now in site settings, this is going to be different. So we're going to leave the designer and we're going to do a couple of these last steps. We were going to go back to Webflow and then click site settings. And first thing we'll do is we're going to upload our little favicon and our web clip icon. These are currently the Relume logos. I want to upload them to my own. So I will make these in Figma. I will use these pixel dimensions. I also like to change the time zone to wherever my client is. Double check that I have turned off the display made in Webflow badge. And then I will move on over to apps and integrations. And this is where you can add any sort of Google Analytics for your client. You can also add Facebook pixels, any other webhooks, things like Zapier, whatever, will all show up here on this page. And I like to get that set up for them as well. Then let's head over to the Forms tab. If you have submission forms, contact forms, anything on your site, make sure that you change this email to your clients and set up your form the way that you would like it. This is great for testing to put it to your own email, but then once you transfer it, you're going to want it to be for your client. This is also where you can add a reCAPTCHA validation if you want to keep from spam popping into that contact box. I do typically like to do that, as spam with the AI bots is just popping off lately. So don't forget to add that as well. And then you can see all these different form submissions down here at the bottom if you have them. Then lastly, what we're going to want to do is go to SEO. And you'll want to add a sitemap. This is great for when Google crawls your site. It's just going to give you another green flag to Google that this is a real site by adding a custom sitemap. And you can follow Webflow's directions here to tell you exactly what to do. It will kind of depend on what your Google Analytics setup is. You've got to verify a domain, but they will explain it much better than I will. And that is our final step for the site settings. And then lastly, transferring the site. This is where you finish the project. Whenever my site is done and I want to send it to a client to review, I always use a tool called Markup.io. And what this tool is essentially allows you to send them a live site where they can pin comments directly to the page. Now, there is a way to do this natively within Webflow, but personally, I just like to keep them separate for my own tendencies. So I use a tool called Markup. It is free, I think, for up to 5 sites. So you can go ahead and use that as well. And then it's a great, easy way for them to add their feedback and comments on the site directly. After that, go through any revision rounds, make your changes, and then you want to duplicate your website before you go ahead and transfer it to them. I always like to build my site within my own account, so that way if I'm using any sort of clonables, tools, things like that, I can do that on my page before I send it to them. But I want to have a backup this site, whether that's just for my own portfolio or in case something goes wrong, or maybe I want to see how I built something in another client project. So duplicate that here. And then once you've duplicated it, you will unpublish your staging site. It's not published, but there will be a button right here that says unpublish. And then you will transfer the original site over to your client by just typing in their Webflow email once they've gone ahead and set up that account. So let's see. And then, okay, typically I will send my final invoice before I transfer the site. Depending on your relationship with the client, it's usually a good rule of thumb. So then once that's paid, it's like, great, now the site is in your Webflow account and you can officially launch it live. And you may need to help them get set up with a site plan, tell them what site plan they'll need. They'll insert in their credit card information, and then you can connect that domain and publish it live. It will be a different process to connect the domain depending on where they've bought it. Most of the time it's through GoDaddy, which is usually the easiest. And then finally, I record and hand off any training videos. So sort of like what you're watching right now, except that it's for my clients and it is specific to their website. And then the project's done. All right, so now that we have gone through that checklist, hopefully you realize all the ways in which this can help you in your business, help you speed up your process, stay more organized, and deliver a better product to your client. Because who doesn't want that? If you haven't yet grabbed that checklist, go ahead and click the link in the description down below. It is totally free. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I want to get way more in depth about a lot of these topics, both in Webflow and website design in general. So I'd love to hear from you and see where you might need more help. And we will talk about that next time, all right? See you later.